We are live. And the sound is on.
Work.
You sure you don't want my?
Yeah, no, I'm good. Very loud.
Go for it, girl.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Hi, I'm Brittany Maldonado, pronoun she, her. I'm the community events coordinator here at the center. So all of our community facing events, like the Second Tuesday series, I help produce. We are very happy to have Raquel Willis here to discuss her new book. We are grateful to Jordan J for being here to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah.
To say that there is a lot going on in the world right now would be the understatement of the fucking century, right? We are all dealing with feelings of anger, frustration, sadness, loss. Our community is still processing the loss of Cecilia Gentili. So just giving a moment to process those feelings. I want to thank you all for being here today and sharing space and community. Oh, okay, Greg, your turn. Thank y'all.
So welcome to the launch of Raquel Willis's The Risk It Takes to Bloom. My name is Greg Newton. I'm the co-founder of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division. That's the bookstore that you are in right now. You're in the bookstore in the center, so you're in it twice. So that's what I wanted to say. It came out. So I'm the co-founder of the Bureau, along with my partner, Donnie Jokum. We founded this project back in 2012, and we've been here at the center since 2014. We are an all-volunteer organization. We're being helped tonight by volunteers Kevin and Sylvia at the back there. Yes, please give it up for them. We would be nowhere without our volunteers. If you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the back of the room over there, or you can go on our website, bgsqd.com, and you'll get an email every other Monday about our many upcoming events. Normally, we are closed on Tuesdays. We're open Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7, and then we stay open later when we have events, which we have a lot of. And normally, we have a lot of art on the wall. You caught us in between shows. Our next exhibition will be opening on Friday, and our bookmarks at the back have details about that, so you can check that out, or you can check it out on our website. What else do I want to say? I think I just want to get to it. So I'm going to do a land acknowledgement, and then I'm going to introduce our two guests. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. We also want to recognize that today is the 137th day of Israel's genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people, funded by our tax dollars and enabled by our government's unwavering support. We hope that you will join us in calling for an immediate permanent ceasefire, an end to the siege, and an end to the occupation in order to stop the collective punishment of Palestinians and to ensure the swift delivery of much needed food, water, medicine, fuel, and medical aid to the people of Gaza. So Raquel Willis is an award-winning author, activist, and media strategist dedicated to Black transgender liberation. She has held groundbreaking posts, including Director of Communications for Ms. Foundation for Women executive editor of Out Magazine, and national organizer for Transgender Law Center. She co-founded Transgender Week of Visibility and Action and currently serves as an executive producer for iHeartMedia's Outspoken, the president of the Solutions Not Punishments Collaborative's Executive Board, and is a WNBA Social Justice Council member. Her debut memoir, The Risk It Takes to Bloom, on Life and Liberation, was released in November 2023 via St. Martin's Press and is available right here at the Bureau. Originally from Jacksonville, Florida, Jordan J., she, her, is a community organizer, arts advocate, writer, curator, and director-producer based in Brooklyn, New York. She is the founder and executive director of the Black Trans Femmes in the Arts Collective. Before founding BTFA, Jordan received her master's degree in art politics from NYU Tisch School of the Arts. Jordan is a firm believer in the power of art to inspire radical socio-political change and is dedicated to using that power for Black trans liberation. Please give them both a very warm welcome.
Hi, Raquel.
Hi, Jordan.
First, I just want to check in, see how you're feeling. How's the tour going?
Yeah, I'm feeling great. It's good to be back in New York for a hot second and to visit with folks. I know we had like 2 events back in November, so I was excited that we were able to do this one. And then for folks who weren't able to come, have this moment. And I'm excited to be in conversation with you.
Yes, I'm excited too. We have so many similarities that I learned from reading the book. Both of our stories start in the same place. Our mothers are both from Jacksonville, Florida, and we are both, Southern people living in New York City. So there's lots of overlap, and I'm excited to get into all of it today.
Yeah.
I want to start with asking you, why did you title the book The Risk It Takes to Bloom? What does that mean to you? Where did you find that title?
Yeah, so I first heard The Risk It Takes to Bloom, the line in a poem that Alicia Keys actually recited at the top of her 3rd album, The Element of Freedom. I was a huge Alicia Keys fan at the time, but I remember hearing this poem, and the day came when the risk to remain tight in the bud was more painful than the risk it took to, as Alicia Keys put her stank on it, she said to bloom. The original poem says to blossom. And I just remember feeling at that moment when I was a freshman at the University of Georgia that I was embarking on being independent for the first time, but also being queer and being open in a different way for the first time. And that just felt like the perfect kind of summation of what it's like to be young and queer and isolated and really not know what's on the other side of sharing your truth. And so that idea of the risk it takes to bloom is something I feel like I return to at different points in my life throughout the book and then even still now.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about sharing your truth. Putting this book out is a big moment of opening yourself up to the world. What made you decide that now was the time to share your story in this way?
Well, it was the middle of the pandemic, actually closer to the beginning, when I started in earnest on the book. I had written different things over the years and started to try and figure out what that looked like, but being laid off from Out Magazine, I talk about it in the book, so it's not like a thing, but that happened, being on unemployment for the first time in my life, but also, I mean, the solitude of the pandemic weirdly gave me space to like focus on this. Because like when you're in like the 9-to-5 like hustle and bustle, that can zap a lot of your energy to create for yourself. And although I was writing and I was editing at different publications over the years, to not have anything going on in my professional life really gave me the space to finish this. And I think it's important to be candid about that because I know a lot of folks who want to create, want to write, but sometimes it's hard to do that or damn near impossible to do that when you're trying to survive.
Yeah. What was it like to revisit parts of your childhood and critical moments in your transition
Mhm.
while we were writing this book. What did you learn about yourself through that process?
It was a bit of a mental tussle, if you will. So when I started my journey of being open about my transness, like 12 or so years ago, it was a different world, y'all. Like, to be openly trans circa like 2011, 2012 was still a part of kind of what I consider the era before the visibility era, where you really were kind of expected to bury and shred up your past. There wasn't really much space to talk about, as a trans woman, my boyhood, right? To talk about my life before. It was do anything you can to run away from that history, honey, so that you can hopefully build a life and survive. So it was difficult to jump into that. I mean, I think it's also been difficult being somewhat visible online for almost a decade now. And, I remember when it was not cute and it was not sexy to be like, yay, trans riot. There are a lot of people who have rebranded as very affirming of our folks who were not, a decade ago. It was a time where you would post on the platform formerly known as Twitter. You would post about your experience as a trans person, and then it was just like dogpiling on you for even daring to speak up. So it was a lot to delve into these parts of my history. Because I think I also still kind of carried this sense of like, if I say too much about my childhood or growing up or life before I own my transness, it could be weaponized against me and be used to chip away at my womanhood.
Yeah, that's so real. I think there's this sensationalization of the before of trans people, especially on that platform that you mentioned.
That one.
The before and after pictures going viral and all of the responses to that. So it really is very precious to share that childhood and that boyhood in a way that you're in control of. So I do want to ask, why was it so important to you to be in charge of your own narrative and the way your story showed up in the world?
Ooh. Well, I think because as a Black, queer, trans person who grew up in the 90s, we didn't really have many moments of representation for us, right? Like, we had RuPaul, who was, this figure that was so amazing to me as a kid. I was like, oh, okay. But RuPaul was really probably the only person who wasn't making a mockery of queerness. And so we do have to give Mama Ru those kudos, right? Because that is true. There was always a sense of strength and power and a version of realness that RuPaul demonstrated in that time. But outside of that, I mean, the examples were like the segment Men on Film from In Living Color, where, they do the snaps in a Z formation. It was all a mockery of queer people, Shanae on Martin. And then, of course, the real life examples were like Jerry Springer, right? Where the dolls were a threat to the natural order of things or to society. So there really wasn't much to latch onto. And I knew I wanted to own my story, I think also when I was super young, like when I was coming into my queerness, I feel like I had to like strategize my coming out even as a kid. Like, I didn't know when I was gonna have to come out, but I knew it was coming. And I felt like I had to arm myself or prepare myself to tell my parents. Like, so my parents and my family were devout Catholics. So we always get at least one. Devout Catholics, we sat in the front pew of church every Sunday. And of course, there were like the expectations of Southern Black masculinity that came from my father. And I just remember needing ammo. Like I needed to be able to chip away at whatever kind of things were thrown at me around, well, this isn't how you're supposed to be scientifically, or this isn't sanctioned by God, or, all of these different things. So I knew I needed to figure out how to tell my story on my own terms and not have anyone kind of tell it for me. And I think that feeling followed me throughout my life, followed me into journalism school and even beyond. Like even now, I have so many issues with the fact that most of the narratives that people have about trans folks come from people who are not us. And actually people who don't know trans people, to be quite frank, whether it is basic ass conservative politicians or it is comedians who probably do know us a little too well.
Definitely.
And are trying to tell our stories for us. Like even now, that's a thing. Even on this book tour, especially with press, I've had moments where I've been interviewed and been reduced to my body, or my medical transition, or weird, prurient ideas about what my dating life must be like all of those different things. And I think we all deserve, especially as queer and trans people, to tell our stories on our own terms.
Yeah, absolutely. Wholeheartedly. You talked about your family a little bit in your relationship with your father. I found that story really just powerful coming from a Black Southern religious family. And we don't really get to see a lot of representation of trans people moving through that adversity with their family, moving through that journey of their family, coming to have an understanding, maybe not the one we want, but I'm curious to know, what did forgiveness look like for you along that route of understanding where your family was coming from and being able to develop relationships with them down the road?
Okay. I'm on journalist Jordan. I guess I don't really use the term forgiveness, although that has come along with me in the journey. It's been more about grace. And I think, I chuck this up to being like a very Southern thing or a Southern Black thing, but like I never expected an apology from like my family around how they, were ignorant at points, right? I mean, it's very rare to get an apology from your parents, period. So I just never really expected that. I guess the grace piece, I had to figure out at a young age, so coming out as gay at 14 and then trans around 2021, how to give them grace in terms of understanding that they just were not equipped. Like our society just does not equip any of us to understand identity or the complexity of gender or our own insecurities around gender. And to be clear, I think cis people have a lot of insecurities about gender. We just don't accept that as a society, but that is a thing. And also grace around the expectations that my family had for me. What other examples did they have of a Black trans woman living freely at all, right? Like, it's only been in my adulthood that I've even had access to stories like people like Laverne Cox or Janet Mock or Kaya Doroshow or even someone like Cecilia Gentili, right? So, excuse me. I tried to give them grace around that. Now, I say the grace piece, but I think the boundary setting piece is also important. So that does not mean you just gonna talk to me any kind of way, and that's gonna fly,
Absolutely.
And there was a moment in the book, I won't spoil it, but my mom said something to me that really made me completely rethink our relationship. My mom was always in my corner, for the most part, but this was a moment where she said something that really struck a nerve and struck at the core. And it really wasn't until I was writing this book that I realized how much that stuck with me, even through her evolution. And so in the prep for finishing up a draft of this book, I wanted to make sure I read especially the difficult moments to folks who were in the book so that they knew. And so I read it to my mom. She kind of like protested a little bit, like, I don't remember it like that. And I was like, okay, this is what happened. Still not expecting an apology, but we came to a conclusion, got off the phone. And then like a day or two later, she sent me the longest text message she's ever sent me. And she was like, I've had a pit in my stomach ever since you read that section to me. And it's your story. You deserve to tell it. And even though I don't remember it like that, I'm sorry. And I was like, what? An apology from a Southern Black mama.
Rare.
Rare. I look like that. I need like that as like a title or something. First Black trans woman to receive an apology from but that so the forgiveness piece came at different points, even when I didn't expect it. But I think the grace allowed for the possibility of that forgiveness. So, yeah.
In the book, you say, and this was something that really kind of hit me in my core, because I think it's something we all think about as trans people, and it's, who would I be without those day one boxes of gender? And I'm curious, who do you think you would be?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know who I would be. Because it's not just about me not having those boxes, which I think that we realize now with more and more young queer and trans and non-binary folks, is that, and I guess I'm speaking more personal, but it's like, even if you don't have those boxes for yourself, or the folks in your immediate proximity don't, that doesn't shield you from like all of these other institutions around us that still do, like schools and places of worship and all of that. But in an ideal world where the boxes don't exist, I guess there would just be a lot more love and laughter and joy and pleasure and just existence. And I think there are a lot of barriers to existence for all of us because of those boxes.
Yeah. You also talk about in the book, when you're at University of Georgia, finding this drag family and donning your drag persona, Rebel Devereaux. I'm curious, at what point and how did Rebel give birth to Raquel? And do you think Rebel is still with you in some ways?
I definitely think every version of me is in me. And so when I went to the University of Georgia and I found like queer and trans folks for the first time, like as a community, this was my freshman year, and I remember, you know, it's all in the book, but I'll just give y'all like a brief kind of snippet. We would have like a big drag show on campus each semester, and the drag show was like just like this big event that like everyone loved. And I don't know if folks were like trying to clock me as anything, but they were like, oh, you're gonna be on the show, aren't you? And I hadn't really had a thought about being in the show. But it's probably also, I was the only openly gay person a lot of those freshmen knew, so that was also a little offensive in a way. But I did the show, my second semester, but that was after meeting this troupe that was mostly like trans men and trans masculine folks. And I just remember meeting them and being like, oh, you identify as something other than what you were assigned at birth. That's not weird to me. And that's not, like that just felt normal. And I didn't clock it immediately that maybe part of the reason that it felt so normal to me was because that was my story. It took a while to get there. But I also talk about the barriers to exploring my femininity. Like there was never a space for that growing up. There was always being corrected. If it wasn't by my dad trying to butch me up and make me play sports. I'm not a trans athlete that anyone should know. Nobody has ever wanted me on their team. But if it wasn't my dad, it was like the way that little boys police, each other, right? And like all of that. So drag became that first kind of playground for me to play around with femininity. And over time, it was like, oh, if I could just be this way all the time, even minus the performance, I would. Like, it's not as much about the performance for me. It's about this like essence that I get to fully be in. And it even got to a point where I would be performing with mostly like cis men who were drag queens. They'd be like, why are you here? Like, are you like this all the time? Like, they didn't get that I was a character, because I guess they sensed something. I even had a trans woman performer also be like, have you figured it out yet? And I was like, girl, what are you talking about? But but it was like those little moments also that I think there was just like an essence there, that it felt affirming for people to see beyond the performance.
Yeah. So
Uh-oh. Go for it.
I am.
I can sense it.
So part of my story actually started with reading Janet Mock's book, Redefining Realness, and coming to the moment where she was in the interview for her scholarship and they asked, well, how did you manage being trans and going to school and doing all of this? And she said, I didn't have a choice. And I remember I was on a road trip with my mom and brother, and I was sobbing behind the book, covering my face because I didn't want them to see me crying at a trans book. But it was a moment of realization for me. And so I'm curious, what impact do you hope that the risk it takes to bloom has out in the world?
Geez. I had a similar experience, I think. Reading about Janet, this was before her book came out, but when the Marie Claire article that kind of first showcased her story came out, I was in journalism school and I had already started being out about my transness and everything, but to see her, and it wasn't just to see her as a Black trans woman, but also as a Black trans woman with a career, right? Who's like, oh, I deserve to have a full life. Like that also was a revelation. But I guess the impact I hope is, maybe other folks can have their own revelations of like what's possible. I think there's a Southern story here that feels so important in owning Southernness. we just don't have a lot of Southern queer narratives,
Yeah.
not enough. So much of the queer or trans story is here in New York or in San Francisco. It was always somewhere else when I was growing up, and so that was a big piece of it. So I hope that Southern folks can see themselves in this. Of course, Black trans folks across the board, and are inspired to tell their own stories. And then, cis people want to be, in the know and cool. I think that there's a universal story here around shattering expectations
Mhm.
and not accepting any of the boxes that society has put us in.
I love that. We are getting towards the end, so this may be my last question. But the subtitle of the book is On Life and Liberation, but death and grief are also so present in the book through the letters that you write.
That didn't work as a subhead.
But I'm curious. I'm curious what made you want to write those letters, and what did you learn about life and liberation from death and grief?
So if you haven't read, this is a good question. If you haven't read, I write letters throughout the book that kind of correspond to folks whose death really transformed me. And the first one is to my father, and then there's one to Leela Alcorn, a young trans teen who died by suicide in 2014. China Gibson, or the dancing doll, who was murdered in 2017, and then Layleen Polanco, who folks in New York probably know, who died in Rikers custody. And I think it also felt important to, in some way, show how, even though all of these different deaths are from people who are in some ways similar, in some ways different, whether it's gender or race. They also all died in different ways, right? Like my dad in some ways died of, natural causes. He had a stroke, I guess that counts. And then Leela by suicide. China was murdered, and then Layleen died in custody. And I wanted to show that even though these moments are hard and these stories are grisly to read, that doesn't mean that we can't take those hard moments and make them fertilizers for that blooming. And I really learned that a lot with the death of my father. Like that was a moment where I had to figure out my life. Hi, welcome. I had to figure out my life on my own terms. And the weird thing about my father's death was, like, although I was mourning and grieving, it also represented a death to some of those expectations he had for me, which has been a really awkward thing to talk about, of course, awkward to write about. But it felt important to talk about those things, and talk about how grief can activate us. I think also just collectively, like we all carry these folks that we've lost, and also folks that we've never met, that we've lost. So that's a part of the, I guess, the liberation and the social justice piece is, Leela, China, and Layleen, I never got to meet in person, but their stories became a part of me and inspired me to dig deeper into Black trans power, in different ways. And, I hope that that inspires other people to look at death as an opportunity to do something different, to create the world that all of those folks deserved.
Absolutely. Well, I think that is all of the time we have with just us, but I definitely want to make sure that you all get to ask us questions. So we're gonna open it up for a Q&A, and I see we have a question already.
That hand shot up.
Roxanne Sheeher, this was a fabulous conversation. You asked earlier, about, reading the section to your mom. But have any of your other family members read your book, and what has been their reception?
A lot of people are waiting for the audiobook, which will be out on February, Robert, the 26th, February 26th. But I read, well, my sister did, because she's a Virgo. And she read early draft of it. I read, pieces to my brother, who was featured in there too. And I didn't read to extended family. There's my aunt Robin, who I had a tense moment with. I'll let y'all read it, but it was very early in my transition. It was kind of the first. It's so many funerals, Lord, that are part of our stories, but this happened at a funeral. It was like the first family event I went to, and my aunt was there. And so that was the first time she saw me after being out as trans. And anyway, it's a moment, but I prepped her, was really nervous because we hadn't ever talked about that moment since it happened, but it was a beautiful kind of moment to gain clarity there. And she was at my Atlanta book stop, so that was beautiful. So yeah, so I mean, and I've had extended family show up too. And even met people like that I didn't know I was related to that came through and was like, we're related. See, folks will come out, honey.
Look out, that's my cousin.
Right. That's exactly it. So yeah, so family has been very supportive. And I will say, I think whether it was family or it was partners or even friends, even like former coworkers, it's overwhelmingly been a positive experience. And a lot of my relationships have gotten deeper with folks because they've gotten a little bit more, I guess, from my insights on our journey together. So yeah.
Hi. Thank you for
Hi.
This is great. I guess I have a question about the same part of the book. I feel like as a writer who writes real lived experiences that often involve stories about close family members and maybe them not being painted in the best light, I find that I struggle with artistic or creative integrity versus emotional responsibility. And was there ever a moment, it sounds like your mother had the best possible response, but was there ever a moment where you were like, she may never speak to me again? And if that was the case, would that have changed how you formulated that story in the book, or whether it would have been included at all? How would that have or have not changed that part?
Oh, good question. There was literally one word that I tweaked, and after I talked to my mom, but it was like tweaking something that I had written as very definitive to like seemed or something like that, right? Like this showcasing my perception of a moment. And I think that was important throughout the book at different points. I think if folks had felt a certain way about some stories, I might have reconsidered, but because I did my due diligence and I actually tried to have conversations with folks for a lot of things, especially like ex-partners, earlier on in the process to kind of know, okay, well, this is my take, what's your take? I kind of bypassed some of those issues, but I did have a sense of a responsibility to make sure what I told of my story didn't infringe on the parts of that are their story. And that is a balance, and it can be hard to do that. And I asked folks if they wanted aliases, right? So everyone who did, like, all my family was like, no, it's fine, girl. They gonna know who it is anyway. And then I had a friend who was like, oh yeah, use my name. But I had a lot of other folks who were like aliases. So like all my ex-partners, I used aliases and other folks too, right? So I think that that helped a little bit of like giving them a choice. And one friend, I let choose what their alias would be. So that was fun. And I stole that from, I think it might have been, can't remember. I stole that from another author who wrote a book on memoir writing. And was like, yeah, if you want to make it fun, let them choose their name. So yeah, so I mean, I know that that doesn't help, but there's also a school of thought that's like, you know, if you have to write your truth and it doesn't paint somebody in the best light, right? There's an author that says like, they should have treated you better, right? I think it might have been Anne Lamott, I can't remember, but yeah. Mhm. I love the like
That's a lot.
energy.
As a writer of many mediums myself, like how cathartic has it been for you
Mm.
just to, you know, like when we write music, when we write poems, when we paint pictures, even with words, it's
Mhm.
often a release. And I think that artists are very much so, I say this all the time, like we're very, we're like internal, like recycle, like we recycle things. So we recycle the energy that we were given, whether it be negative or positive, and then we regurgitate it as something else. So this book, like that regurgitation, basically of everything. And how has that helped you like move forward? Do you feel lighter after releasing this? Do you feel, you know, like where are you like with all of that?
Yeah.
So my question.
I feel transformed in a different way. Through the course of writing this book, I turned 30. Okay. I'm sending you love. You know, and I think it was a release in a way of it just gave me a chance to process everything in context. I also got a new therapist, so shout out to my therapist during this process. So it's kind of like doing double duty with therapy on the page and then my little like Zoom sessions. But I feel lighter around my experience. And I feel proud of being able to make sense of it in this way, but also own that like my whole life isn't in the book.
Right.
Right. So there are other nooks and crannies that I plan to dig deeper into in different types of work moving forward. But I think people forget that I'm also not the same person as I was when I finished the book over a year ago. So that's a thing. And the process of this release has transformed me. So I'm not the same person. And then also the time frame of the book ends in 2020. So even that is a different version of who I was. So I do feel lighter in a sense. And I do think, I don't know, I just wish everyone could have this experience in whatever medium that they create in. Yeah. You look like you had a follow-up.
I did want to follow up. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Okay, so like, boom.
Oh, wait, one more thing. Can I add one more thing? So because so much of my story and my perspective is out, I do think that the types of relationships that I hold close are different. Like there's just a different requirement around the type of intimacy that I need in my close relationships. And that's family, that's romantic, that's platonically, that I demand more now. Because I've shared so much of my story with the world. So those kind of lessons came with the turning 30 and the finishing this book all at once.
Okay, so boom, I'm glad that you said that.
Okay.
So boom, do
Boom.
you, boom, so do you, in like this self-reflection, right? I'm such a hyper.
What's your sign?
I'm a Taurus.
Uh-huh.
I am so, but even I feel like as trans people, because we oftentimes, the responsibility and the reflection and the self-awareness is always put on us, right? Like to the point that it's almost like we're hyper vigilant in the self-awareness, so that we're in our bodies, but we're also like right next to us, always looking back at us because we're so self-conscious, right?
Yeah.
So, was there ever a moment, was there ever a moment when you were like, damn, I fucked up? Like, as you were writing this book, right? Did you ever think to yourself, like, damn, because we talked about, like, Jordan touched on forgiveness, you touched on grace, but from an external.
Right.
So did you ever write this book, and was there ever a point in you writing this book where you're like, yo, I really need to give myself some grace? And this is, like, this, in behavior, or even like you just touched on, like, the type of intimacy that you were allowing. Was there ever a moment where you had to stop and think, like, this was equal, like, this was also partly me? And if you don't mind sharing, like, and what was that specifically, if you don't mind sharing?
Okay. You want more. You see how I go. You give people a whole memoir and then they want more. So the grace is both ways, right? So the grace is to others and also to myself. I think the moments that I most had to figure out how to give myself grace was, I guess, in terms of the process, there's just a way, if you're any kind of visible as particularly a Black trans woman, but so many other parts of that experience too, as a Black woman, on and on, you're kind of put on a pedestal. And I think I had to become very aware of the fact that folks expect me to always say the right thing and to always have the perfect word that's going to be inspiring and make them feel better about their lot in life. And it's like, bitch, I can't do that all the time. And I shouldn't be expected to do that all the time, because that's a different type of dehumanizing. So I had to give myself grace around that as I was writing, that, like, you don't have to put the expectation on yourself, and I don't have to put the expectation on myself to have solutions to everything. It's okay to just have some questions sometimes about life, all these different things. Another, I guess, more tangible thing around giving grace is, I had, and this is the different parts of my career, I had, I won't say pivoted because I never completely left media work, but working in nonprofits, right? Like, there's just this idea that you have to be the selfless saint, or at least profess to be. And that can be at odds with having a media career. So then when I went back into corporate media, I struggled with that. And I talk a little bit about that struggle in the book of, like, is it going to be possible to carry my values into this space too? Which is a tension, and it's hard. I talk about, this is closer to the letter around Laylene, but that June of 2019, it was like Laylene died in Rikers custody at the top of June. I was in an Express Pride campaign. And then I was just kind of reckoning with all of these things that people like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera tried to inform our communities about, right? Like capitalism and the failures of our movement to show up for the most marginalized in the most tangible ways. And so, and I think that that's an ongoing struggle I continue to have, and I think a lot of folks, all of us, continue to have, right? I think folks are really contending with it now, of course. I know so many folks, right, who are aware of and understand that Palestinian folks are experiencing a genocide right now, but won't say anything because they fear losing their job or losing a bag, you know? So I mean, I think that tension around how we survive with these systems of oppression, and also how we do as best as we can to live up to our values is something that we all hold. And I definitely tried to grapple with some of that in the book. But there's no solutions there, like no like perfect solutions there. So yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that this makes me think of, thinking about Cecilia, right? Like there was tension for me around this event. You know, Cecilia was supposed to, you know, be, and I'm so glad, Jordan, that you're here, and I don't mean it in that way, right? But Cecilia was, we were originally gonna be in conversation. And I feel okay saying this because family has said this, but Cecilia, before she passed, told me she didn't want to do the event anymore. Because she was up for the executive director job here at the center. And there was a feeling that, you know, trans women of color can walk on water and do so much and still never reach some of these top positions in our community. And that is a problem. And it feels important to name that uncomfortable tension. And we can name institutional failures without internalizing that as a personal thing, right? I don't know the current executive director, and it's not really about her, but we do have to be able to have these hard conversations and give ourselves grace for feeling the ways that we do. Because there is just like a historic erasure of trans women of color's leadership. And there's a way that we can be the spectacle, and we can be on the stage, we can be in front of a screen. But this idea of us being deserving of the power, we're still trying to catch up in some of those ways. And it felt important for me to say that and name that in this space, right? That is a tension I've been holding since she passed. Yeah, I know that's a lot. So let's. Can we take a deep breath together? Okay, inhale on 3. 1, 2, 3. Hold it. Out. I think we need to do one more.
Yeah.
One more. Oh, you're like, yeah. Okay. Inhale. Hold. Out.
Do we have any other audience questions? Sis?
I have 2 questions. I'm trying to find a world where they go together so you can just answer them. But I think you commented on saying it's easy another way. I think for me, speaking to I guess like speaking for and being representational like that, you know, and people always expect that from me. How do you, I think I'm navigating a space of trying to feel like, I feel like my personal mission in life is community, doing for community. But I'm reconciling with a lot of guilt of feeling like I've somehow in turn trying to find my peace or find my solace or find my way in the world in a multitude of ways, including like financially, like that I've turned my back on community. Because sometimes I don't always process myself as being the marginalized person that I am. How do you navigate that reconciliation with being like, no, this is me time, and not feeling like I have to profess this so people know that, oh, I'm in a moment of me time as opposed to like cheating, you know? And then my second question was, do you positively or negatively, do you have any regrets or things that you would change in your journey of finding yourself? Those are the two. You can find a connection.
Okay. Wow. I mean, I think, you know, we talk about self-care a lot in community spaces. I have to be honest with y'all, it gets on my fucking nerves. People are like, what do you do for self-care? Cause it's like, never enough.
Right.
I know.
But, trans day of rest.
I learned from the best.
I love it. But it is, I mean, I do think that, we deserve to turn it off, right? And when I say off, I mean, turning off the armor that we have to put on, turning off, again, having the solution, turning off being the energy in the space, honey, because the dolls will give it to you every time. We will not suffer in blandness, okay? But being able to turn that off and just exist is a beautiful thing. And I often think about like my sisters and my siblings as self-care, right? Because it's those relationships and those spaces where I can just be myself and I don't have to be the version of myself that the rest of the world accepts, right? Or affirms. Because that's not always the same. We know that. So it's the spaces and places where I can be with my folks where I can be angry and full of rage and sad and broken and distraught, and not feel like it'll be held against me. And actually that folks cherish that they get to see that side of me. So those are the moments mostly where I feel self-care. Now I like a little, you know, massage moment, good food, you know, being near the water, all of that stuff. But it's really those moments that I feel that healing the most. And then to your other point, I'm trying to remember now.
Any regrets?
Any regrets? No fucking regrets. Like, I don't know how we pulled that off, but no, I don't really have any regrets. And a large part of me owning my truth when I did was that I didn't want to have regrets. Like that was one of the lessons I learned from losing my father at 19 was like, I do not want to have regrets at the end of this short, precious life. And that was the gift that he gave to me in his passing.
Yeah, we have time for one last question.
My homie Lamar.
Hey, girl.
Hey, boo.
I just started reading the book yesterday, Don't Beat Me Up, but I'm on page 70.
Shameful.
I
Okay, but can we also say, because you're probably I don't know who else has had this experience. Lamar and I met when I was working on pages for this book.
Yeah, I saw her sitting at the bar and I was like, you're Raquel Lux, right? Awesome. I live next to you.
Yeah,
But it's been a beautiful read so far. I think I've cried like maybe twice.
okay, great.
I'm on page 7.
We'll say it's
So it's-
gender reparations, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, so thank you. Page 46 especially, when you talk to your dad in your backyard. Well, I guess this is now after you've come out to him. He's had a terrible reaction. You all talk in the backyard and it ends in a beautiful hug.
Spoiler.
Yes, I mean, it's on page 46.
Get the book.
I was curious about your writing process, and as someone who believes in a connection with my ancestors, what was the process of you writing this, and if there was any connections to your father during this process? Like, what did that feel like?
Yeah, weirdly, I'm not a religious person, but I consider myself a very spiritual person. And I think some of that is like a gift my dad gave me too in his passing, but I feel connected to my dad, and also my grandma, who I lost shortly after him. And yeah, I don't think I struggled so much with connecting to him. It was more wanting to feel a certain vibe of like the time. So there were moments where I would listen to like Outkast, the 90s, like the 90s Outkast music. Excuse me. Sorry. Or moments where I would listen to like oldies to like get into that mood. Like when I think about my dad, I think about that Stevie Wonder song, I Wish. And he's talking about looking back on when I was a nappy-headed boy. And it's like those things that make me think of my dad. But I think also, I was lucky enough that my dad wrote like a short story based on his life. And so my mom made sure that I was calling during an event. Anyway, so thinking about that short story, and it's really a story from his boyhood, but I think another thing around the grace piece is in writing this, like I was able to think of my dad not just as the role that he played in my life, but also of like him as like a little boy, right? Like some of that experience is in me too. And so there's a grace there. I mean, I became more curious about, well, what were the boxes for you? Because I had my boxes and they weren't the same, but I know you had your boxes too, child. What were those? And so that was a little bit of like where the process took me, in trying to like piece together his story. But my dad comes to me in dreams. Like I have that kind of spiritual relationship. And there was this dream I had the week that I was finishing the book. I think maybe a night before I finished like the last final edits on the book, when my agent Robert was like, thank God, child, she got this, man. But I had a dream and my dad was in it. But it was interesting because I won't say all of it, but there was kind of a reversal of, I think, our role. And there was just like a sense that like there was a healing that he's still going through in the afterlife. I know this sounds very woo-woo, y'all.
Go there.
But
Talk about it.
I think that there's a piece in like me being able to give him grace that hopefully will give his spirit healing. Because I'm sure if we believe that there are spirits in the afterlife and you figure out things on the other side, I'm sure there are moments where he's like, oh, well, shit, I fell there, you know, or I should have been more understanding or more open, whatever. And I guess just like with my mom who's living, there's a relinquishing of that. Like, I'm okay. I'm okay. And all the things we went through that made me and made all of this possible. So thank you for those things.
Yeah, let's all thank Raquel and give a big round of applause. He is gonna be signing some books, so make sure you stick around. If you haven't got a copy of the book, now's the time. Make sure you read it. It's a wonderful read. And special little plug, the cover was shot in BTFA Studios.
It was.
So please support BTFA, make sure we can keep supporting the girls. Follow Raquel, stay up to date on her story, and be prepared for the audiobook release. And thank you to the center and for everyone who made this night possible, and thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jordan and Raquel. And thank you to everyone who joined us online. Good night.